Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Seth and Gentry Show. And we're just going to start off right now by go ahead and telling Georgia fans, don't worry, we're not going to sit here and diagram the play and talk about the play and make all of you depressed again for the zillionth time this week. But just in a larger sense, first off, this is Gentry Estes. That's right?
I'd imagine if you're watching this, you probably have a pretty
now,
good idea.
You know.
But dogs 24/7.
Right. Let's just open-ended question for you, Gentry. What was your takeaway from the Auburn game? You want to say well? Yeah.
That was my. I mean, it was it was a shocking comeback to me. I thought Georgia was dead in the water, and people would be amused to watch sports writers during a fourth quarter like that because everyone had a story written for Auburn to win going away.
Right.
Then here comes Georgia.
Right.
So everyone's got a story on Georgia coming back in this great comeback victory. And then everyone ends up writing a third story all in the span of a few minutes.
I actually didn't have the Georgia winning story written, not because I thought that Auburn was going to score on that drive, but because it happened so quickly. I mean, the change in emotions, Aaron Murray getting into the end zone and it being upheld on replay, and then you're looking at the clock. It's 1:45, I guess, is what it was left, and you're saying that would be a lot of time for Auburn, but Georgia's defense has figured them out, and it just ends up being a fluke play. And it goes back to this. Some people want heads to roll. They want recriminations. There's been this whole big thing that you and I have kind of gotten involved into this week about whether the coaches told them to knock it down, and blah 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 blah. But sometimes, Gentry, doesn't stuff just happen?
Yeah, a play like that. I mean, if you want to fault the defense for giving up all these yards in the first three quarters of the game and all these points, then okay, all right. Auburn really did very well offensively for most of that football game, but I think that Georgia did what they had to do in the fourth quarter defensively to give the offense a chance, and the offense made plays to do it. And just like you said, the range of emotions just in that stadium was unlike anything I've really experienced. It was. I can think of a couple of games, really, that compare to that I've covered in my career.
And it, by the way, wasn't over after the Auburn
No, and that was
play.
Georgia had a legitimate chance to throw the ball in the end zone. They said Conley was open on that last play where Murray got hit, and I think he was. Can you imagine if Georgia scores there?
What if they'd called targeting? Which, Aaron Murray, to his credit, says it wasn't targeting. But I think you and I both agree that we don't think the Ray Drew case, the two calls at Vanderbilt weren't targeting either.
If they'd called targeting, not only giving Georgia that play over, but taking Auburn's best pass rusher away for the first half of the Iron Bowl, that place would have burned. Yeah, the referee would have not. Yeah. You can't. Targeting, not targeting, at that point in the game, and it was just a great. It was a great game. It's unfortunate for Georgia they weren't on the right side of it.
Let's talk then a little bit about the defense, because that's been what's getting a lot of the attention. What do you do from here? Look, there's two more games, and then if something's going to happen, something's going to happen. You and I are not going to get into speculation or anything like that, but in a larger sense, Gentry, when you look at this defense this year, do you think it has been more disappointing than you expected? Or do you think that the expectations should have been low to begin with, and they've kind of hit those low expectations?
I do think the expectations should have been low to begin with, and I think to a certain extent, I think everybody understood going into the season what they were up against, especially opening with teams like Clemson and South Carolina. And I think, really there were grumbles about the defense, but it really didn't take on it went to another level when all the offensive guys got hurt, and it started costing them games.
Guys were saying that. I remember Brendan Langley, who no longer plays, but I remember him saying, if we don't get better, and this I think was after the LSU or Tennessee game, if we don't get better, then it's going to cost us some games, and lo and behold.
Yeah, and they really had improved if you look at the numbers going into the Auburn game, and Auburn's offense is a handful. It's going to be really interesting for me to see what Alabama does against that offense, because that offense is that is tough to stop. What they do, that 4 yards, 5 yards, just going right down the field.
I looked at it. Georgia, the five best offenses they've faced in terms of total yardage rank in the top 41 nationally, and Georgia has held 4 of those 5 teams below their total yardage average, and the exception is Auburn, which got 73 yards over its average via a certain play.
I'll say this: the defense is maybe a little disappointing from what people expected, but I still don't think it's been the complete train wreck that you might.
Yeah.
That the perception's out there that it has been. I think there have been certain plays that have stuck out to people and have kind of defined this season.
Yeah.
The Auburn game being the epitome of it, but there already were, even going into that game,
a game they won, LSU, all the third downs.
Yeah, that was one, and Clemson had a play where Sammy Watkins ran over a tackler and went all. I mean,
the tackling on this team, it's just not there. Tackling in space is just
the
how many times is it the first guy to bring them down?
And really, the backup quarterback coming in scrambling for a first down in Missouri, that might actually be
that was
And Vandy
had its backup quarterback too.
Yeah.
There's just, and I put it this way in my mailbag. Stat wise, they're actually, when you look at the things I just threw out there, there's some there's some excuses, there's something you can point to, but as far as the eye test, it's not a good defense.
And here to me has been what that is hinged on is the safety position. And when you go back to the preseason, they all those guys were hurt. They weren't out there. Corey Moore didn't participate in any of the 3 scrimmages. Neither did Trey Matthews. At that point, Quincy Mogger's kind of rising up the ladder. But this is a true freshman and a guy who's going to be asked to do more than he probably should have been early on. And I think you could say that about a lot of guys back there. You didn't have Harvey Clemens against Clemson too, so he's not getting a full rep. I mean, it goes
Harvey
back to
Clemens also has not been the difference maker that a lot of people thought.
Who on the defense has? Like, that's the point. They're not forcing the issue. They don't have Jarvis Jones out there.
They don't have Alec Ogletree. And that was something we talked about. People who are watching scrimmages, were telling us, like, well, be careful what you say about the defense because they don't have a Jarvis Jones or Alec Ogletree just kind of flying around out there. Maybe Josh Harvey Clemens will be that guy next year. Maybe Trey Matthews will be that hard hitter, Thomas Davis type that people were hoping for next year. Maybe Marlo Herrera will really be that kind of Akeem Dent kind of guy. But not that yet. And Jordan Jenkins and Leonard Floyd haven't been the consistent down-to-down guy you have to worry about.
It just seems, with the exception of the defensive line, which I actually believe has played very well this year.
Yeah.
I think the defensive line has overachieved.
Guys like Chris Mays have been pretty,
Mays has been
solid.
very good. Ray Drew's come on this year.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
there's a lot to feel good about on that D-line. But for the rest of the defense, it just seems that every area, if you want to feel good about it, there's a reason not to. Okay, Leonard Floyd's a heck of a player, going to be a heck of a player, but he's still a freshman. He's making freshman mistakes. You can say the same about several of the DBs. Guys like Marlo Herrera and Rameek Wilson are blue-collar, very tough football players. But they don't, they've been asked to cover in space a lot.
I wonder if this year's defense has just been kind of on its heels emotionally from the beginning. I mean, I think they thought they were, we talked to them in the preseason, they thought they were going to be good. They thought they were going to surpass expectations. And when they didn't, I think it's been a little harder, and it'll be better for them next year
because there is ability, and they saw that.
And I think it'll be
Yeah.
better for them next year going in with. And again, we don't want to speculate on what other changes might happen on the defense, but they're going to go in with basically the same personnel, and people are going to be saying, well, how can the same personnel be that much better than they were last year? And they'll use that as a chip on their shoulder. Whereas during this year, they've just been kind of. We just, they've been swimming. They've been lost.
A lot of times, I think it's improved, but it is hard to say with the expectations, though. I mean, I know it sounds like it's an excuse for the offense to blame the injuries, and it's an excuse for the defense to blame
It's not an excuse for the offense to blame the injuries. Defense, I think it's a...
People still don't want to hear that
Yeah.
stuff. They care about 6 and 4, and that's it.
Yeah.
But at some point, excuses...
But they're not being blown out in those 4 games.
No, they're really. I mean, we were talking about that.
They're not blowing the other team out in the other 6, but
you could look at all 4 games and point to. I mean, so you could point to 3 or 4 plays and say Georgia's season's completely different.
Point to 1 at Vanderbilt, Missouri, the trick play touchdown, make the stop there. Clemson's a little harder. but there was a field goal difference there with the muffed field goal. And then this past game,
And
obviously, there's one play.
Clemson, there was a turnover deep in their territory.
Yeah. It's one of those years. I mean, some people, the people we hear from a lot of times, they want heads to roll, they want recriminations, they want blood. And, I'm not saying that there shouldn't be some changes, but, sometimes you do have to take into account mitigating factors. And I know people don't want to hear that, but it's true.
Well, and, we're sitting there in the press box at Clemson, and by the end of the first quarter, Georgia's best wide receiver's got ice on his knee, and we think he's torn his ACL, and Georgia's best running back is limping around and not playing.
And it was only
not
the
a good
beginning.
sign. It's one of those things happen, and I kind of wrote this that, injuries happen, but your best wide receiver doesn't always tear his ACL celebrating a touchdown. I mean, just weird, strange things have gone against this team all year, and that's why I say what happened at Auburn, in a weird way, it just felt fitting. It's the same kind of stuff that's been happening to this team all year. You can't really explain it.
Yeah, again, just to kind of wrap up with what we sort of started with, I don't think that 73-yard touchdown was symptomatic of huge problems or of anything else on the defense or on the team. I think that play was a fluke.
I agree. I do. I thought it at the time. But you could make the case that Auburn's got as many points as they do because the defense didn't play well early, or you could make the case that the game's only close because of what Georgia did to come back.
Yes.
So, just one of those games. I can't think of very many games in my career that have been like that. Although the 2001 game at Tennessee in Rick's first year.
Was that the hobnail boot?
Yeah. It was similar in that Tennessee hit that screen pass to take the lead, and which remains probably the loudest I've ever heard of football.
I wonder what Larry Munson would have, what his call would have been on the play the other night. Yeah, well, I'm sure Scott Howard's. I heard his was good too. Anyway, on that cheery note,
what do you say?
Yeah,
I didn't know what to say. I think I just wrote unbelievable.
We didn't really discuss Kentucky, did we?
No.
And if we are discussing Kentucky next week, that's probably not great for Georgia, but
it's almost basketball season.
They're going to be good. But Kentucky, they've got Willie Cauley-Stein back, and Julius Randle kid's really good. The Harrison twins.
Kentucky is all about the basketball.
They are. Yeah. And Georgia has a basketball team.
A couple games. We're probably too many minutes into this.
If you're still watching, you're tuning out now as we're discussing basketball. So
yes,
you know what? Join us next week as we preview the Georgia Tech game.